Right, let's make a start. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed food in the university rather than university food. There is a slight distinction. It's quite nice. I remember what it used to be like, so I always enjoy eating it now. It's good. Welcome back to this afternoon's session. We're going to hear from the remaining thematic area leaders. The first on skills gaps, and the second on cultures and behaviours. And then we're going to have a short break just for some refreshments, and we'll go into the final workshop and also hear from some of the Sustainable Transition Fund project leaders. So there are a number of other projects running in addition to the ones you're hearing about today that are specifically designed to fill gaps that have been identified. They cover lots of different areas. Some of them are related to communicating to consumers issues relating to environment, into issues relating to EPR. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker or speakers. So we have Professor Amada Briggs-Goode and Stella Claxton, who are going to take you through progress on identifying major skills gaps. Thank you. And if I could be so bold as to advance your face, right?
You're very hot.
You okay with?
Yeah. I think I have to manage that.
Someone has to.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Amada Briggs-Goode. This is my colleague, Stella Claxton. We both work at NTU. And we are working on Thematic Area 4 on skills. We're working with UKFT, so we're working closely with Adam, Lauren, John West at UKFT on what we're doing. So we're going to do a bit of a tag team, Stella and I, today. And so I'm going to sort of start by just reminding everybody, if they were here at the jump-off point this time last year, about Thematic Area 4. And what we're really seeking to do is to understand and map the skills required to support the fashion and textile industry's transition to a sustainable model within a circular economy, and to establish how knowledge and skills gaps are being addressed at all levels of education, assessing and looking for alignment with current and future industry needs. And I think that sort of distinction is quite important about what's needed now and what's needed in the mid and long-term future. And we also aim to explore how consumer skills in care and repair can be improved to prolong garment lifetimes within a circular system, and how to support them to make informed choices about the textile products they purchase and better navigate the eco-credential claims that we heard something about earlier. I'm going to pass over to Stella for a while.
Okay, so I'd like to just take you through how we've approached the research so far. So we basically commence with a review of published data on skills, which there isn't a huge amount of, and it's kind of unevenly spread around what we might describe as a circular supply chain. But we've been looking at academic literature, any published academic literature that talks about skills and circularity, global circular economy reports that may be a bit more generic and could be applied to a range of industries, and then also specific reports that talk about skills needed in fashion and textiles specifically. The intention is to sort of review this baseline data and analyse it and sort of identify any gaps in knowledge, of which we already know there are quite a few, and then use those gaps to kind of explore in a bit more detail through primary data collection, what actually is missing in terms of our understanding of skills needs for sustainability and circularity. And we are doing this, as I said, with the three, so the primary data collection will be with the three main stakeholder groups, which will be industry, education and the consumer. So the intention is to carry out with industry a series of focus groups to based on the sort of three main sections of the circular supply chain, which is retailers and brands, manufacturers that cover all of the manufacturing, probably apart from fibre production, and then also the reuse and recycling sector. So it's very broad, what we need to look at, but there is such a lot that we don't know. Yes, and also on the industry side, we probably would like to do some case studies using companies at different stages of circularity, engagement, looking at them and their sort of focal companies and their supply chains to look at what they have experienced in terms of identifying skills gaps across their endeavours. For education, we're planning a similar approach. We're looking at higher education, which we've already started doing, and then also rolling that out to further education, GCSE, A-levels at schools, and then apprenticeships and also continual professional development providers. In terms of consumers, our research and primary data collection will cover things like garment care and repair. And we've already had a couple of Sustainable Transition Fund projects that are going to address that aspect of consumer skills, and then also looking at behaviours around sort of purchasing second-hand clothing as well, which is a project that is being led by RAT. So all of these initiatives, then hopefully we're going to build into some kind of sort of general reports and papers that can kind of feed into our final report at the end of the year. So the planned outcomes of the research are initially we want to publish a critical review of what we already know, and then use the primary data collection to inform some extra papers and reports that will feed into the final report. So I'll take you through some initial findings from the published data that we've managed to identify. So, as we all know, we've heard today, a circular fashion and textile system is very much more complicated and complex than the traditional linear model. It requires a more systematic approach in terms of actually trying to sort of transition to being more sustainable for the industry. So, for instance, we found out that, there's a lot of evidence that says that circular fashion design and product development is more complex. People working at that sort of initial part of the process need more technical knowledge to kind of support the development of new innovative fabrics, fibres, products and processes, which have a sort of lesser environmental impact, the ability to carry out life cycle assessments, etc. And then also for designers working at that front end, it's not just about the sort of technical knowledge, it's the sort of soft skills around being able to work in an interdisciplinary way, work in multidisciplinary teams, be able to sort of facilitate progress and innovation towards developing solutions. Within manufacturing, it's felt that there is more scientific knowledge needed to support sustainability, enhanced understanding of data and all the systems that are needed to support things like product passports and traceability. And so the acceleration of that sustainable transformation in manufacturing and supply chain is really important as well. And then finally, I touched on the soft skills. That's essential in all areas because circularity and sustainability really require that kind of working outside the silos that we maybe traditionally tend to work in, both in industry and education. And it's important that we find ways of making sure that people working in the industry can kind of overcome those barriers to develop effective solutions. And I would say also that when we think about skills, we're looking at quite a complex picture because when we talk about skills, there's ways of classifying skills right from the operational level to the tactical and managerial level to the sort of strategic level. So it's a very complex picture that we're looking at. So I'm just going to take you through also some of the challenges we're finding with the published data. So the scope in itself is a challenge because we could describe it as an industry of industries. So textiles and fashion encompasses lots of different products, market levels. We've got things like technical textiles, things like functional textiles like schoolwear, medical textiles, plus fashion, and then all the associated things like dyeing and finishing, all the different stages of manufacturing. So it's very complex in that sense. So where to focus is a challenge for us in terms of the project. We've decided initially to sort of focus on the fashion industry itself and sort of exclude things like technical and medical textiles. So very much focusing on that part of the market. Because there's a lack of established circular practice. So circularity has existed as a concept for a while, but it's not really established anywhere in a meaningful way. So it means that a lot of the information that we're gathering from evidence about skills is either vague or it's speculative. So it's difficult to sort of pin down. And also it's unevenly distributed. So there's quite a lot of data published, for instance, at the front end of the process. So we can find a lot of evidence that talks about the types of skills needed for design and product development, but very little around, for instance, the reuse and recycling sector. And then we have, within some of the industry reports, we're finding that there is, I suppose, a bit of a muddying of the water when people are talking about skills. So the industry, if you look at certainly the industry in the UK, there are aspects of it, when we're talking about the sort of manufacturing sectors, or aspects of the manufacturing sectors that maybe are struggling with skill shortages already in certain areas because we have an ageing workforce. It's difficult to attract new entrants into the industry. And so sometimes some of the thinking from those types of sectors is fairly short term, and therefore that that anticipation of what skills might be needed in the business to address circularity and sustainability further down the line maybe is not there, and the focus generally is on the existing issues that are kind of prevalent at the time. So as Amanda just said, that another layering of complexity is the fact that we need to think about what's needed now, what's needed in the medium term, and what's needed in the future. And a lot of that is missing in the published data. And finally, the final challenge is the actual availability of data. So when we're reading some of the reports, they are citing various surveys or research instruments that they've used. It's very hard to dig behind that sometimes and really kind of get to grips with how they come up with that information. The methodology might not be very clear. When we've asked at times for the raw data, we've not been able to access it either due to it not being available or it's behind a paywall or something. Or there's a confidentiality issue with it. So that's been a problem. And then also some of the detail that we need isn't there. So for instance, the previous slide I talked about designers need technical skills. What technical skills exactly? Who is saying this? Really trying to dig a bit deeper into the detail of what skills are needed can be a little bit challenging. So over to me. Yeah. Okay.
So what we decided we were going to do with those sorts of challenges that Stella's just outlined and sort of was to kind of see if we could test out some of those ideas. And we decided to start that with a particular focus on fashion and textile design. And the reason we started there was to do with the fact that there is a wealth of academic research into sustainability and circularity and the related skills within that. And although it's only one element of the circularity framework, design is kind of frequently cited as being a critical factor in driving progress, and it's central to the EU legislation that is coming forward in terms of mandatory eco-design standards. and will affect any and every brand and retailer who want to sell into the EU. Prominent multi-stakeholder initiatives such as RAPS, Textiles 2030, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Jeans Redesign Project also seek to inform and engage brands and retailers in sustainable and circular design. And we wanted to explore higher education initially to kind of look at degree course content and look at the provision that was supporting the development of the skills demanded by the industry for sustainable and circular fashion design. And we started by wanting to contextualise and really understand some of the quantities that we're talking about in terms of, students who are going through an educational process at undergraduate level, and understand how many students are being trained, so we could understand the kind of balance of design skills who are emerging into the industry across practice-based courses. So this data here is from HESA, which is the Higher Education Statistics Agency. So universities have to report what their students are studying. It's very much up to them what subject set they report to. But this information here gives you kind of a snapshot across the last 10 years. So it's interesting to kind of think about in those subject sets, we can see textile technology as being a kind of a relatively static, very small number of students being reported against that. We can see textile design students sort of having a bit of a peak in 2019 and then reducing. And then fashion design has stayed quite static. There's a slight complication in the way these subject sets were put together. So before 2019, fashion business courses and fashion practice courses were counted together. So that's why that pink line disappears and they start then just looking at practice and business courses separately. And I haven't put the business courses on here. It's not relevant to what we're looking at.
Although we will be doing.
We will be doing that at another point, absolutely, yeah. So we then kind of wanted to interrogate that in a slightly different way, and that this data kind of offers a little bit more granularity on what that looks like in terms of courses. So it does sort of correlate what the HESA data tells us about who's studying what, but this information's gathered from Guardian league tables. We could get more accurate data from UCAS, but that's behind a paywall and we can't get to that. But it does really provide insights for us to understand where the growth and reduction of courses have occurred across these kind of 2 years, 5 years apart snapshots that we've got here. We can see that while the number of fashion design students studying hasn't changed dramatically from the previous slide, the number of courses offering fashion design has increased from 39 to 55, and textile design numbers have dropped, but actually, and the number of courses have dropped from 26 to 20, and we know that the number of students studying that have changed as well. So in short, across 111 design courses, we're educating about, at any one time, about 11,000 fashion and textile design students in the UK. So on average, that's around 4,000 students graduating, emerging into the job market as designers each year. And then taking the sort of data that is on this graph here from UKFT's Oxford Economics report, we can see that there are, in 2023, when this report was put together, there is a kind of an estimated 29,000 active job roles that are in design and product development. So that gives us something else that we want to explore about the kind of sustainability of the numbers of students coming through, but also the opportunity in terms of those people bringing in circular and sustainable kind of approaches into the workplace when they join. There is, a really fantastic resource of students there who could start to influence industry very strongly. So it also raises questions about the types of graduate skills from design education. And the next step in what we wanted to do was really kind of to explore how aligned they are with industry in creating circular mindsets, and understanding the impact of materials, processes and lifestyles. So we found this quote from a BFC report from 2022, and it says that many courses claim to be teaching circular design principles. And this was a survey taken with HE educators in fashion and textile design across the UK. Stella remembers filling it in for NTU. And we really wanted, this is one of the scenarios, we really wanted to get to some of the kind of raw data behind that survey, so that we could analyse it. And we unfortunately we weren't able to do that. But in an effort to kind of corroborate this, we decided we'd do a desktop review, and we started looking at course specifications, module specifications, learning outcomes, module descriptions that we could find on university websites. And we did a bit of a deep dive on about 10% of those 111 courses and 10% from the fashion business courses. And we only found half of them kind of made reference, a direct, clear reference to sustainability and circularity, and some of those softer skills we were also analysing that Stella referred to as well. Now, there is a massive disclaimer there in that university websites are not always up to date. There are all sorts of challenges. So we're not assuming from finding that out that those things aren't happening, and that there is anything wrong with that BFC quote there. But that's kind of giving us a kind of a set of things that we want to investigate and explore. And that then moved it on to the focus group that we engage with.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we're going to carry out a series of focus groups and other qualitative research with stakeholders within education. And because of what Amanda says, we weren't able to get to the detail. We thought the only way we could find out what people are teaching is actually taught to them. What's being taught on these fashion and textiles courses. So we started off by carrying out a pilot focus group to help us sort of develop the series of focus groups that we're going to be doing in May and June. So we got a group of educators together in fashion and textile design courses, and really we were talking to them about their sort of perception of what is best practice in teaching sustainability and circularity, how they're embedding that into teaching and learning, how they assess, what kind of projects they're doing with their students, how they were assessing them, and the kind of sort of, and also discussing with them some of the skills that, within the literature that we're finding that experts are saying that designers should have to be successful in sustainability and circularity, those technical skills, understanding materials, understanding life cycle assessment and things like that. So we had a big conversation about what they were teaching. And actually it was a very in-depth conversation. I've only got a sort of a very limited list of findings here, but the main issues that we found that within, even just one department of fashion and textile design courses within one university, there's actually considerable variation across the different courses of modules, how sustainability and circularity is being taught. To an extent, I suppose that reflects the nature of higher education, not just being having a responsibility to reflect what industry is doing, but also to question what industry is doing and sort of alternative sort of concepts or thinking around what is a sustainable or what a sustainable fashion industry could be. But there was very little kind of, consistency across the different courses in terms of that. So how they approached it was very different. Of the sort of course content where students were doing projects on sustainability and circularity, they were all tended to be around sort of creative ways of repurposing waste. So things like zero waste, pattern cutting or upcycling or things like that. This doesn't really reflect the focus of industry, which is very much, concentrated on materials sustainability at the moment and the fibre, and reporting on things like sort of broader things like carbon footprint and water use, etc., sort of chemical emissions and those kind of things. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. There was a quite considerable variation in educator knowledge, which isn't unusual because educators maybe have different strengths and areas of interest in research. But we saw that where educators had, sort of research experience or enhanced knowledge in circularity, they were taking it much further. So you could almost question, the sort of, I suppose, the equality across a department, whether students are being exposed to a sort of equitable amount of content in that sense. So then, sometimes the knowledge of what best practice is thought to be. So that some of the educators have found it challenging as well to kind of keep up to date with what was happening and understand those aspects of a circular supply chain that aren't as established. So particularly the reuse and recycling areas, they found quite difficult to understand from a global perspective, and what the possible solutions were there. We also carried out an analysis of fashion and textile design job adverts over last autumn. So we did some content analysis of what kind of skills were being asked for. And so we looked at, I think it was over a 2-week period, we looked at 60 job adverts of jobs being advertised in the UK. And out of 60, only 2 were asking for sustainability or circular. In fact, nobody mentioned circularity, only 2 asked for sustainability. And actually, it was interesting to see how, it was kind of touched on in a very minimal way. So this was one of the examples. Knowledge of fabric sourcing and sustainability trends is a plus. And at the other end, this is how design jobs tend to be advertised. So we know we're exposing, the students are exposed to this kind of, this sort of, this is where there is a real lack of alignment, On the one hand, we're seeing, and we've both had this experience of teaching students, we're talking about sustainability and circularity, to the extent sometimes where they can be put off the industry. We're talking to them about it. They see job adverts with this kind of language. So it's the message sometimes, and this is a company, I'm not going to name them at the bottom, but they are members of Textiles 2030, they're members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so this is where students are starting, we think, to get confused about what the industry wants. And actually, this was also mentioned in the focus group by those educators who were involved with employability initiatives on their courses, where, for instance, if they're managing placement programs or helping students with their, graduate job applications, is that one of the participants said nobody is asking for it. None of the employers are asking for it. That's what they said. So yeah. It feels like, and maybe naturally there is a sort of a lag between what we're teaching and what the industry is looking for. But certainly the published data and the research, the vast amount of research that there is on how designers can make a difference in industry is not currently being used in any way really by the sort of majority of the industry, it appears. And I think it'd be very interesting to see how that research develops. That was just one focus group. It was a pilot focus group. So we are going to carry that on. We're basically wanting to sort of, Amanda's already started this work, but we're looking to kind of engage with some different universities, try and get a consensus of what best practices, what we should be doing, and then also engage with industry to kind of talk about how we can anticipate what's coming, because we need to educate designers for what, for what the industry is now, but have an eye on what the future is going to be. And we don't seem to have that scenario plan in place to be able to align more successfully with that. So that was just really a snapshot of one area that we've made some progress with. And then just to kind of recap, our next steps are to try and we're going to complete this initial report on the published data. We'll then start carrying out our primary data collection in more detail, and then finally start developing some outputs and papers and reports that can sort of help us understand this. We've got a couple of papers that we did bring on next month, and then one in September at academic conferences. So thank you very much for listening to us.